Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:09 p.m. in a very dark Budapest. And at this moment, I usually do my spiel about how utterly miserable and depressing and dark and awful life is. However, I'll give it a miss today because there's some quite cheery news today, namely President Putin's address to the Russian people, and we're going to talk about that, which he kind of laid down his intent, which is basically that Russia is ready to strike targets in NATO land outside of Ukraine. And we, or at least I, have been waiting for something like this for a long time. So that's put me in a more cheerful mood. So I thought I'd give it a miss with the cold, dark, sunless, miserable days in Budapest. Anyway, welcome everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate your being here. And so, we'll come to discussing Putin's address to the Russian people. And but we could talk a little bit about the events in the United States, namely Matt Gaetz's withdrawal from consideration as Trump's Attorney General. I was a little surprised by that because I thought that Gaetz is a very pugnacious sort of person. He's not a quitter, and Trump also is basically not a quitter. And so even if the votes were not there for Gaetz, he would have stuck it out just for the purpose of making clear to Republicans what scumbags Republican senators are. Because let's remember, Biden got all of his nominations through, and he got all of his nominations through because the Democrats held the line. So if your party holds the line, then you're basically going to get your nominations through. And but the Republicans are always congenitally incapable of holding the line. So the same Republicans who were happy enough to give Biden all his nominees basically have already sabotaged one of Trump's nominees, really within days. So within days, they've already sabotaged one of Trump's nominees. And this is always the case. This is what they always do. They lack any will or ability to hold the line. And of course, we all remember Watergate, when all Republicans, and of course Republicans at the time, were in a minority. However, if they'd held the line for Nixon, Nixon would have survived. And it was a disgrace. It was a disgusting performance by the Republicans that they did not hold the line. There was nothing at all that Nixon was accused of that was so heinous that he deserved to be removed from office. There was nothing that Nixon did that other presidents hadn't done. It was a cooked up scandal by the Democrats, by the judiciary, and of course by the media, who of course all hated him. And the Republicans, boom, collapsed. As they always, it was collapsed. So here again, they collapsed in the case of Gaetz. Now, I have very little interest in any of this sex scandals, and I don't. The only issue that would matter is if he had broken the law. I mean, whether he paid women for sex or whatever, I mean, what does it matter? And even the whole thing about with a 17-year-old. Well, a 17-year-old is not a child. So it's not really having sex with a child. I mean, they're going to try and play this game. Oh, she was a child. She's 17. In many states in the United States, the age of consent is much lower than 17. So 17, I think, is legal in most states of the U.S. I mean, even that the whole pretense of saying that a 17-year-old is somehow a child is ridiculous. But they always do this. I remember the this is complete by the by, when during the Trayvon Martin trial, the prosecutors, when they were claiming that somehow this was this terrible, horrible murder, was it Zimmerman? Zimmerman was the defendant. They kept referring to him as a child. Trayvon Martin was a child. I think he was also about 17. But the problem was that Trayvon Martin may have been 17, but he was 6'2" and weighed about 200 pounds. I mean, you're not going to persuade anyone by calling him a child. But anyway, that's the part with Gates. So they've done that, and I thought that Gates would hang in there, and so that if the vote for him failed, then Trump could primary or punish those Republicans who had voted against Gates. Now, yes, probably you can't do anything with Murkowski. She's not even in the Republican Party anymore. I mean, she may caucus with the Republicans, but she's not in the Republican Party precisely because they'd already tried to get rid of her in Alaska long ago. And in fact, they did kick her out. The Republicans did that. Then she ran as an independent, and the Democrats supported her. So that's how she comes to be in the Senate. So there's nothing much you can do about Murkowski, but I'm sure that you could do something with some of the other Republicans. But there it is. I mean, they couldn't hold the line, and he was, I that's why I thought, well, fine, let Trump do this, and let him do the recess appointment. He said he was going to do the recess appointment. Let him do the recess appointment. So they didn't do that, and obviously Trump withdrew his support. I mean, I think if Trump had held the line himself and had told Gates, "Hey, I'm going to support you right through to the end, even if you go down and the Senate votes against you, I will still support you, and I will put to shame the Republicans who voted against you." You'll say, "Hey, this Republican bunch that was ready to vote for Merrick Garland, that was ready to vote for Lisa Monaco, voted for this ridiculous Mayorkas, the Homeland Security guy. They voted for those people, but they couldn't bring themselves to vote for Matt Gaetz. So so he said, "Yeah, I'm going to go all the way down there, and I'm going to make that a point." He doesn't need these as Republicans. He's that's it. He's a one-term president, so he can just basically do whatever he feels like doing. He's not seeking re-election. So Jonah once says, "A 17-year-old can look great until they begin to talk." It's true, but a lot of people, they don't necessarily have to be a 17. I mean, I just think that it's such a ridiculous notion that a 17-year-old is a child, and that somehow you can even bring up the issue of pedophilia and so on. I mean, it's just, I think people who use the word pedophilia in this context, I think that they don't know what pedophilia means. So there's nothing pedophile about anything like this. So Trump withdrew his support. I mean, you have to say, I don't believe Gates would have withdrawn had Trump not told him to do it. I mean, I think that it was Trump who obviously pulled the plug on him, because I don't think Gates would have just would have just withdrawn like that. So now you have the blood in the water, so to speak, and of course they're all gonna go after his other nominees. I mean, Hegseth, they're already salivating to go after Hegseth. The CNN is running kind of 24/7 stories about Hegseth and this sexual assault allegation. And the same, what applies to Gates applies to Hegseth, which is, if the police don't think there's a case to be prosecuted, then that's it. That's as good as you can get. And the point is, Gates was investigated. He was investigated for about a year by the Biden, Merrick Garland Justice Department. They had investigated Gates for a year and then said, there's no criminal case to be answered. If they thought that he had done anything criminal, they would have prosecuted. And there's no question they would have prosecuted. They don't like Gates. Why would they spare Gates? Why would they cover anything up for Gates? That was the Biden Justice Department that investigated Gates and found that there was nothing prosecutable. So that's why the Republican cravenness, including Trump's cravenness, which we'll say, is pathetic. I mean, if you're going to collapse as easily as that, then why nominate Gates? I mean, you have to think Trump must have known when he nominated Gates that there would be extensive scandals that would that would be dragged out and twisted around Gates's neck. He had to have known that. He knew that this was a controversial pick, and that he would have to fight on behalf of Gates. He didn't do it. So I don't know what did he expect? What did he think was going to happen once he nominated Gates? So of course they were going to dig up all this dirt on him. I mean, I knew that the moment I heard that Gates had been nominated. They, well, wait, they've got all this stuff that the DOJ had been investigating. All that is going to come out. So Trump didn't do anything to save Gates, and by acting in the way he did, he kind of had had damaged Gates's reputation, because Gates is now in a bit of a bind because he's had to withdraw his nomination. He's now resigned from the House. I know there are people saying that, yeah, but he only resigned his term, the term that expires on January the 3rd. He didn't resign the term that begins on January the 3rd, but I don't think that's true. I think he's resigned. I don't think he's going to take up the term for which he was elected in November. So he's out of the House. He's now, I think, damaged goods because the media ran with the scandal. He had to withdraw his nomination because of the scandal. The president-elect who had nominated him had obviously lost confidence in him because of the scandal. So he's in a bit of a bind. I mean, it's going to be difficult to think of what's his next act. I'm sure there will be a next act. He's a young man. I mean, he's a talented person, but it's not good when Trump withdraws his support like that. Because I mean, Gates would probably have been better off not accepting the nomination and just simply biding his time until he can run for Ron DeSantis's job as governor, which of course he can still do. But he's damaged goods now, so I think if he does that, I think he'll be in a difficult position. I think there'll be other candidates, and it may be it may be difficult for him now to be Ron DeSantis' successor. So, and it kind of reminds me with what happened to Michael Flynn in 2017. Again, Trump didn't support him. Trump should have supported him. Again, that was an obvious setup to destroy Flynn, and he didn't do anything to support him. So that's in a difficult mind, but difficult situation for Gates. But now they're going to go after Hexeth, and as I said, Hexeth's situation is very similar to Gates's. I mean, you got a lot of accusations, but at the same time, the police decided not to prosecute Hexeth. And that's really the best you can get under the system. I mean, they can investigate. But if they decide, well, we're not going to prosecute, then that's it. You've got the best from the system. Now, he paid off a woman who claimed that he had assaulted her. But the fact that you pay somebody off doesn't really mean a great deal, because of course, if you have a job at, say, Fox News, as Pete Hexeth had, and you have the whole Me Too hysteria, which was gathering momentum at that time, then any woman coming out of the woodwork and claiming that, so-and-so sexually assaulted me, she will be believed. We have to believe women. All women have to be believed. So it would have made sense for somebody like Hexeth, since he wanted to save his job at Fox News, it would have made sense for him to pay off his accuser. It doesn't mean that he was guilty of anything, but it's basically how you settle a nuisance suit. That's what hush money is. Okay, if you blab about this, it's going to damage me. By the time we get to the truth of what it is you've accused me of, I will already long been out of a job and long been completely discredited and unable to find another job. So it makes sense to pay off your accuser. Again, this is what Trump did in the case of Stormy Daniels, because again, as I said before, I don't for one moment believe that he had sexual relations with Stormy Daniels. This is a guy who could get all sorts of classy women in Manhattan. Why would he waste his time on a porn star? It never really made a great deal of sense. So I think that was just, again, an extortion racket to squeeze money out of Trump. Probably the whole extortion scheme in the case of Trump was cooked up by Michael Cohen. I think Cohen was trying to squeeze Trump for some money. I mean, that's kind of what he did. I mean, he just stole like mad from Trump during the years that he worked for him. And I think he and Stormy Daniels cooked up that whole extortion scheme. So I think that's the case of Hexeth. But now with Gates out of the picture, they're going to go after Hexeth, and then see whether the Republicans will fall and again fail to hold the line on Hexeth. I couldn't care less about Hexeth. I mean, I like Gates. I had great hopes for Matt Gates at the Justice Department. Justice Department really needs somebody to clean that place out. And Gates would look like a good candidate. You know, there's somebody very different from the Bill Barr establishment type, who would of course be hired in order to cover everything up. So Gates, I'm kind of a little depressed about. But if Hexeth goes down, you know, I couldn't care less. I don't think, you know, very much of Hexeth. I do agree with him on the point about women serving in combat. I think that's a stupid idea. It was always a stupid idea, because you know, I mean, if you're in combat, you need great physical strength, you know, great physical abilities, and if you're going to have women there, then the men that they're fighting alongside would not be focused on targeting the enemy. They would be focused on protecting the women, and they just simply, it would be detrimental to the fighting effectiveness of a unit when the men are just obsessed with protecting the women rather than gaining a military advantage. So it was a totally idiotic, ridiculous thing when they started inserting women into combat roles. I mean, fine, you have women in auxiliary roles, but not in combat. So Hexeth, I think, was right about that. And so, but you know, that's the, you know, the media, which are focused initially, all their focus was on oh my God, he doesn't want women in combat. That is a horror. You would have thought they'd think, great, you know, women can get out of combat. You know, thinking that's a good thing. You don't, women can be spared the combat. You know, it'd be bad news if you say, yeah, we should have women in combat. Yeah, that's what you don't want. Or at least that's what women don't want. You know, thank God he's going to spare us getting killed. And so you know, that's the one thing. But then after the media's initial attack on him on this his retrograde views on women, then they fixated on this so-called sexual scandal. So, but again, if Hexeth does go down, and again the Republicans fail to rally around Hexeth, then you can see that the Democrats, you know, step by step, are making their comeback after the disastrous election results of November the 5th. They always do this. They're very skillful. Just like, you know, they've been counting and counting and counting the votes. They're still counting the votes. So, you know, it's now 16 days since the election, and they're still counting. And lo and behold, as they keep counting, Trump's margin of victory keeps going down. What a surprise. You know, so Trump's now, you know, he was above 50% just after November the 5th. Now he's percentage of the vote is below 50%. So that's how you do it. You just keep counting and counting, and then suddenly, whoa, this margin of victory is very, very narrow. It's a lot narrower than we thought. Trump doesn't really have a mandate. So that's the the revanchist says, just look at says women can serve nobly in a variety of other roles in the U.S. military, but most shouldn't be in combat. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's exactly right. No one is saying women shouldn't be in the military. You know, there's a lot of auxiliary roles that just shouldn't be in combat, and that was the rule up until very recently. I can't remember what year this changed. I think it's probably changed under Obama, but it was a ridiculous change. It was obviously a totally, you know, stupid thing done in the name of you know, political correctness or, you know, wokeism or whatever, but clearly absolutely detrimental to fighting effectiveness. So, and then of course after Hexeth, the target will be Tulsi Gabbard. Now, with women, that's the great thing about nominating women, is that there's never any sexual scandals that you can dig up. There's no case of their assaulting anyone. There's no case of their using. Well, like sometimes you can bring up things that they used offensive language. Sometimes when they were 20 years old, they were sending out tweets using all sorts of nasty words. Like those. You remember like Caitlin Collins on CNN, or that terrible person. They kind of they dug up some I think tweets of hers, or I think it was tweets, or not tweets. I think they were just messages she had when she was 20 or 21 years old, which were offensive. She was making offensive comments about gay people. So they dug this up, but if as long as you have the right politics, it's not held against you. So that's why so she was at CNN. They dug up these messages of hers. It was the Republicans, Republicans. I think the log cabin Republicans, which is the gay Republicans, kind of dug up these messages of her in which she made rather nasty, derogatory comments about gays, and then she said, "Well, I was very immature, and I'm not that person anymore." And that was it. I was forgotten. She didn't lose her job at CNN. That's very similar to what happened to Joyanne Reid when they dug up all kinds of comments that she also made about gays. But in that case, she outright lied and said somebody or other had stepped in and altered messages from years ago. But I think in her case, it wasn't messages. It was stuff that she had written, articles she had written that had been altered. By magic. The Russians did it. Putin did it to discredit her. But again, she didn't suffer any consequences. So that's something that if they were to find anything like that out about Tulsi Gabbard, that could probably sink her. Even though I think she initially, in her earlier incarnation before she became a figure in Democratic Party politics, I think she did hold quite retrograde views on gays, or this retrograde in the view of the Democrats. And again, she changed her position. But no, the problem with Tulsi Gabbard would be the things she said about Russia and Syria. I don't know whether that would sink her, because they would obviously be Republican senators who would absolutely fume and rage about those so sometimes I catch a message and then I get distracted. It says, Stacey Lewis says, "Have a good day, George. The word gay used to mean happy." Yes, that's very, very true. That's very, very true. But by the same token, you could say that the word queer used to mean being very strange. And it was actually a very good word, because it's not just it meant strange, but strange in a very troubling way. When you say that this person is queer, you meant he was strange and vaguely, troubling. And then it, the word sort of, became misappropriated, and then now the word is just completely no longer in use at all. This is something you just stay away from, ever from using it. But no, I think that these, with Tulsi Gabbard, you got the Republicans will not like the things that she said about Bashar al-Assad. They will not like the things she said about Russia and NATO. Of course, she was completely right in what she said. But they're going to hold it against her. I don't think that will be enough to sink her nomination. I think the Republicans who who would be troubled by her statements will say, well, I hope that you will be much more judicious in your job when you come to examine the activities of Vladimir Putin. And she said, yes, never, yes, I will call balls and strikes. I'm not balls and strikes. If Putin does something, I'm going to call him out. Bashar al-Assad does something, I'm going to call him out. So, I don't think it's going to be enough to sink her. But you never know. If Trump is as ineffectual in defending his picks, then she may sink. I mean, and then we could just have a cabinet and an administration that will be like any other Republican cabinet and administration. The usual picks, usual kind of Republican establishment types with all the conventional views. All the various Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio and the rest. So like that. That's obviously where the Republican senators, all the Thunes and Cornyn's, want to go. And then today you had Nikki Haley, the unspeakable Nikki Haley, attacking. She's the ambassador for Boeing, attacking Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley is a friend of our enemies. So Thune and Cornyn and the rest want to see in a Republican administration pretty much like any other Republican administration, with lots of people like Nikki Haley and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz in positions of power, in a way not dissimilar to Trump's first term, which was actually a fairly conventional Republican administration. The usual type of people who worked for Trump who would be working for any other Republican president, whether it was Bush the elder or Bush the younger. There's the same type of people who would have been working for them. So this time, Trump did something different. He did appoint these conventional establishment Republican types, but he also appointed some interesting, unusual picks. But now they've picked off one of them, Matt Gaetz, and now they're going to try and pick off the others. I think they're going to try and pick off Hegseth. They're going to pick off Tulsi Gabbard, and then again they're going to go after Bobby Kennedy. So we'll see whether Trump puts up a fight. It's everything's still up in the air. And speaking of Trump and putting up a fight, I have to say that Trump has been remarkably silent while the Trump has been remarkably silent on the events of the past few days. So remember, Biden has dramatically escalated the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, having lost the election, having been bundled aside by his own party, and then his hand-selected candidate having been rejected by the public, with the public clearly making it clear that they want the wars that America is involved in as a result of the Biden politics, that they want those wars to end, which is why they voted for Trump. Trump has not said anything to the various escalations that Biden has engaged in. So remember, Biden first of all said that he was withdrawing his ban on U.S. military contractors being used in Ukraine. And then he promised to send $800 million to Ukraine to build a drone factory. $800 million. You can build, make a lot of drones for that. So $800 million. Then, of course, he said he was withdrawing. Well, he didn't say it, but clearly, the story was leaked to the New York Times that the U.S. the U.S. restraint on Ukraine's use of ATACMS for attacks inside Russia. Those restraints are now gone. And then Biden said that the prohibition on providing Ukraine with anti-personnel mines, that too is gone. So Biden has made a number of big steps over the past few days, and Trump has said nothing. Now, as I've said, and I know people disagree with me and so on, but as I said, Trump has never really said that he intends to seriously end this war in Ukraine. You kind of got to remember Trump, when he was seeking the nomination. So from immediately after the midterms, 2022, when he announced that he was seeking the Republican nomination for the 2024 race, then he was making a lot of very, very tough statements about the neocons, about how close we are to World War III. Biden is leading us to disaster. No more wars, and that he was going to end these interventionist wars that was being driven by, I don't know whether he used the exact word like a military-industrial complex, but he said by the foreign policy establishment that is always getting America involved in wars. And he said these things over and over again while he was seeking the nomination. Which that means through 2023, and that's when he talked. Once he nailed the nomination down, his tone changed quite considerably, because he didn't need to appeal to the MAGA base. And so that's why in April 2024, remember the senators, the Republican senators, they all supported the Biden $100 billion package for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan. And that wasn't the problem. The problem was the House, the GOP, was very divided. With a very powerful, very vocal faction within the House GOP, which was said not one penny for Ukraine. That was again Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor, not one penny, and then it helped bring down the speakership of Kevin McCarthy. And then Johnson also said, well, I'm not bringing this bill to the floor. But once Trump nailed down that nomination, then Johnson was ready to bring it to the floor. So in April 2024, Johnson goes to Mar-a-Lago, and Trump said, yeah, fine, great, yeah, bring it to the floor. And they brought it to the floor. Of course, 100% of the Democrats voted for the $100 billion package. The Republicans were split. I think a little more than 50% voted against. But if you got whatever it was, 45% of the Republicans voted for, then of course it passed very easily. And Johnson knew it would pass very easily. Trump knew it would pass very easily. So Trump essentially facilitated that $100 billion package, which involved $60 billion for Ukraine. So Trump very skillfully has sort of presented himself as being sort of anti-war, Ukraine, while at the same time he facilitated this the dispatch of this $60 billion for Ukraine. But nonetheless, everyone keeps repeating over and over and over again that Trump is going to pull the plug on Zelensky. He's going to pull the plug on Ukraine. He's going to withdraw U.S. Aid to Ukraine, when Trump has said nothing of the sort. He has never come remotely close to saying anything like that. He talks about, I'm going to bring this war to an end, never spells out what he's going to do. And even today, people could say, oh, yeah, well, the moment Trump arrives on January 20th, he's going to bring it to an end. And they keep assuring you. Go on the internet and they go, oh yeah, Trump's going to do this. I saw a little bit of. I don't like to do this. I find it all quite nauseating. A little bit of this Napolitano judge. The judge. He's the judge. Hasn't been a judge in 30 years, but the judge. And he had on Gilbert Doctorow, an absolute kind of ridiculous propagandist, completely worthless intellectually. And of course, saying, yeah, well, that's. This is all. What about this? Biden signing off on these on the use of these attack arms. Yeah, Ukraine's done. Ukraine's finished. Won't make any difference. And of course, Donald Trump, he's going to bring this war to a swift conclusion. And then they play an excerpt of Trump giving this speech about, well, we got to, these crazy, this World War III, we cannot risk World War III. No, we can't, no to World War III, no to warmongers. There are going to be no warmongers around you. So, of course, Napolitano and Doctorow didn't say that statement of Trump's is from more than a year ago. I mean, you're pretending that Trump somehow made this statement 3 days ago. He didn't. He said it more than a year ago at the time when he was seeking the Republican nomination and had to get the support of the MAGA base. The MAGA base is, yes, absolutely against money for Ukraine. But that's not Trump. So he kind of enjoys this, this reputation that he's going to pull the plug on Ukraine. Well, if that's the case, then you ask, well, how come Trump hasn't said anything over the past few days? I mean, this is pretty dramatic changes that Biden has made. And Biden is clearly in defiance of the vote of the electorate. There was an election on November the 5th. The voters had made their feelings felt. Why is Biden doing this? And, Trump, who says, hey, I won the election. Well, why doesn't it say? This is a very dangerous game that Biden is playing. He's violating essentially the will of the voters. Moreover, there's still 2 months to go. I mean, it's like Trump doesn't take over for another 2 months. Imagine everything that you can do in 2 months. If I were Trump, I would be quite worried about what he can do, because whoever is making the decisions, you say, during those 2 months, he could get Russia and NATO into a shooting war. And this really brings us up to date to what happened. The moment this story went out, that America had signed off on the use of the ATACMS deep inside Russian territory, of course, Ukraine used these ATACMS. And then, of course, this was followed by the use of the Storm Shadow missiles, which were provided by Britain. Now, as you know, Russia has made clear that these missiles cannot be operated by Ukrainians. They need American or British technicians to operate them. They need satellite imagery. They need targeting information, particularly especially on flight path, the time of firing, and everything else. This has to be done by the Americans. The Ukrainians do not have that. They don't have the ability to figure out the satellite targeting and the optimal time and how and optimal flight paths and everything else. That can only be done by NATO technicians. So essentially, if they use these ATACMS and Storm Shadows in Russia, it means the United States, Britain, and NATO are bombing Russia. They are bombing Russia. And that means Russia is now in the position of Libya and Syria and Iraq and Yugoslavia, North Vietnam, as countries that get to be bombed at will by the Western powers because they're so weak that they don't have the means and the power and the capability to do anything about it. You get bombed by America and you just have to lump it, too bad. You don't, you're nothing, but they're great powers. So when they do this to Russia, when they bomb Russia, they're essentially saying, Russia, you are no longer a great power. We can do this to you at will, and you don't really have the means to hit us back. Now, this is a very serious step, because the Russians aren't just going to accept this. And if Putin were to, for one moment, to settle for this, I think Putin would be removed from office. I mean, the Russians can't possibly accept, being reduced to the status of a Libya. Hey, we just get bombed and we just have to lump it. Now, as I say, Trump hasn't said anything, and therefore it's possible. And I don't know it is, but it's possible that Trump is in on the know. That he's being briefed by Biden about the ATACMS and all these different decisions that he has taken. In other words, Biden, in other words, Trump, Mike Waltz, know exactly what the administration is doing, and maybe they've given a commitment to Biden that they're not going to do anything about it. So I want to, then Putin made then last night we had an attack, which initially Ukraine, Zelensky declared this was an ICBM attack. He said this is an ICBM attack, which was kind of strange because why would you want to waste an intercontinental ballistic missile on a relatively short-range attack? But that's what Zelensky said initially. This was ICBM, and it was MIRVed. It had these multiple independent re-entry vehicles. So in other words, they have a number of rockets attached to them, so they can hit a number. So one missile can hit a number of different targets. That was the initial Ukrainian claim. The Americans expressed some skepticism. They didn't think this was an ICBM, but the Americans said that this is something new. We haven't come across this missile. We can't quite figure out what this missile is. And then Putin, later in the day, delivered an address to the Russian people. And I want to go through this because it's a very important address. And I think it's worth going through it because this is as dramatic a statement by Putin as he has ever made. So let me pull this up. And then here it is. So here's the statement by about Putin, and I want to just basically, yeah, all right. So here we have. He says, I would like to inform the personnel of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the citizens of our country, our friends around the world, as well as those who continue to harbor illusions about the possibility of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, about the events that are taking place today in the zone of the special military operation, namely after the use of the long range weapons of Western manufacture on our territory. So this was after several hours of speculation as to what was this missile. You had the initial claim by Zelensky that this was an ICBM, and then you had the Americans expressing bafflement. They couldn't quite figure out what is this missile. It's not an ICBM, but it's not anything we've come across before. So then, after Putin went on television to address the Russian people. And then he says, continuing the course of escalating the conflict in Ukraine provoked by the West, the United States and its NATO allies, Putin usually refers to them as satellites, so that's polite, have previously announced that they are giving permission for the use of their long-range precision weapon systems on the territory of the Russian Federation. Experts are well aware, and the Russian side has repeatedly emphasized, that it is impossible to use such weapons without the direct participation of military specialists from the countries that produce such weapons. So this is something that he has said before, but he emphasizes it. You can't, they don't have the ability, particularly with the targeting, with the trajectory. This can only be done by Western experts. And it said on November the 19th, 6 US-made ATACMS, operational tactical missiles, and on November the 21st, during a combined missile attack by the UK-made Storm Shadow and US-made HIMARS system, military facilities were struck on the Russian Federation in the Bryansk and Kursk regions. From that moment on, as we have repeatedly emphasized earlier, the regional conflict in Ukraine provoked by the West acquired elements of a global nature. Our air defense system repelled these attacks. As a result, the goals that the enemy obviously set for itself were not achieved. The fire that broke out at an ammunition depot in the Bryansk region from falling ATACMS missile fragments has been extinguished. There are no casualties or serious damage. In the Kursk region, an attack was carried out on one of the command posts of our North Group. As a result of the attack and anti-aircraft combat, there are unfortunately casualties, deaths, and wounded among the personnel of the external security units of the facility and service personnel. The command and operational personnel of the control point were not injured and are conducting in a routine mode the management of the actions of our troops to destroy and expel enemy units from the Kursk region. So notice just what he's saying here. The ATACMS, this is the one that's provided by the Americans, that was used to hit an ammunition depot in the Bryansk region. But the Storm Shadow, which was used in the Kursk region, the Storm Shadow, which was provided by the British, did lead to casualties. I think that's just an important distinction. So the first one, the ATACMS, didn't lead to casualties, but the other one, the Storm Shadow attack, did lead to casualties. And then once again, I would like to emphasize that the use of such weapons by the enemy is not capable of influencing the course of combat operations in the special military, blah, blah. Our troops are successfully advancing along the lines of combat. Then he goes on. In response to the use of American and British long-range weapons on November the 21st of this year, the Russian armed forces launched a combined strike on one of the facilities of the Ukrainian defense industry. in combat conditions, one of the newest Russian medium-range missile systems was tested. So he's saying this is something new. He's admitting this is something new, and the Americans had been saying all day this is something new. We haven't come across this this type of Russian missile. So one of the newest Russian medium-range missile systems was tested. In this case, with a ballistic missile in non-nuclear hypersonic equipment. Our missile man called it Oreshnik. The tests were successful. The launch goal was achieved on the territory of Ukraine in the city of Dnipropetrovsk. One of the largest and well-known industrial complexes from the times of the Soviet Union was hit, which today produces missile technology and other weapons. And then we are developing intermediate and shorter range missiles as a response to US plans to produce and deploy intermediate and shorter range missiles in Europe and the Asia Pacific. We believe that the US made a mistake by unilaterally destroying the INF treaty in 2019. Again, that was Trump, this peacemaker Trump, who withdrew from the INF treaty under a far-fetched pretext. Today, the US not only produces such equipment, but as we see in the course of training its troops, it has worked out issues of transferring its advanced missile systems to different regions of the world, including Europe. Moreover, during exercises, it conducts training on their use. So he's basically saying what America's now done is it's deploying short range or intermediate range missiles, as you know, the Americans and the British are they're deploying them in Europe, and so Russia is responding. Let me remind you that Russia voluntarily and unilaterally took upon itself the obligation not to deploy medium and shorter range missiles until American weapons of this kind appear in any region of the world. Let me repeat, we are conducting combat tests of the Oreshnik missile systems in response to the aggressive actions of NATO countries against Russia. The issue of further deployment of medium and shorter range missiles will be decided by us depending on the actions of the United States and its satellites. And now we come to the really interesting statement. The targets for destruction during further tests of our newest missile systems will be determined by us based on the threats to the security of the Russian Federation. We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities, and in the event of an escalation of aggressive actions, we will respond just as decisively and in kind. So read that sentence again. We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities and in the event of an escalation of aggressive actions. So that I recommend that the ruling elites of those countries that are hatching plans to use their military contingents against Russia seriously think about this. So in other words, he's saying what he should have been saying a long time ago, that we reserve then the right to hit military targets in those countries, in NATO land countries that are facilitating the use of their weapons against us. So it's pretty much saying, yeah, you do this again, whether it was Storm Shadow or ATACMS, we will hit military targets in NATO countries outside of Ukraine. We're going to do that. And he had to say this because he could not, Russians could not just live with this without essentially ceasing to be a great power. Now, given that he pointedly suggested that the Storm Shadow had led to the deaths of Russians. If Russia is going to attack NATO countries, then the first target would be Britain. I mean, it's Britain that has provided the Storm Shadow. It's Britain that has been the most belligerent. It's Britain that has, one British leader after another has been foaming at the mouth and demanding that all restrictions be taken away. Then Britain would, I think, be the first target. And of course, once he does that, and obviously they're just going to hit a military target on the British Isles. It'll be up to the British as to what do they want to do. I mean, the British are going to scream and scream and scream, but they're going to have to make a decision and say, are you ready to get into a shooting war with Russia? See, all these people, and you see these ridiculous talking heads who go on CNN and so on, and so they go, "Oh, Russia's bluffing. Okay, well, what are you going to do if it turns out that they're not bluffing? What's plan B? I mean, they don't have a plan B. They just say, Russia's bluffing. Okay, well, if it isn't? What if they're going to hit military targets on the British Isles? Well, what are you going to do then? And this is why it's so ridiculous. These people, they come on from all these think tanks. Well, we've all been led. We've been intimidated by Russia. Putin has been saber rattling, and we've taken all this too seriously. It's hindered us from helping Ukraine because we've allowed ourselves to be intimidated by Putin's threats. Okay, fine. Don't be intimidated by his threats. Go right ahead. Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, hit them again with Storm Shadow. See what you get. Putin has now said this. I think it's going to be very hard for him to back down. This is his most explicit threat yet. This isn't just sort of vague talk about this is dangerous escalation. He has said now that if you do this again, we will hit countries that are providing weapons to hit our territory. And as I say, I think it's going to be hard for him to back down from this. I also think it's going to be hard for him to survive politically if he doesn't do it. I think that there'll be just another leadership that will just remove him from power. And the way they removed Yeltsin from power, I think that's he doesn't have much room to maneuver now. It shouldn't have come to this. This should have happened a long time ago. But now finally he's done this, and let's hope that something will come out of this. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments of the Gagglers. So we go to our Gaggle page on locals. It's always good. These are the people who do provide the funding for the dogs. They're the ones. So the dogs will they can keep them away from me. So they don't tear me to pieces. So it's very, 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 very nice of Gagglers, who do this for me. Anyway, Danaki says, "Dear George, is there a more ridiculous nomination than that wrestling lady for education of all things? How can we one-up that? Alex Jones for press secretary, Joe Rogan for attorney general, now that the great young hope of Gates is dashed. Funny how all the uber Zionist nominations still stay. Come on, people. We got to pump those numbers up. Trust the 5D Planned Patriots." Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a. I don't like to get too censorious. Linda McMahon. Look, I've never understood the appeal of things like wrestling entertainment. I mean, it's so stupid and so fake. and so childish. I don't understand how people can find this enjoyable. I mean, real wrestling is, of course, a sport which requires great skill and great physical strength. But unfortunately, there's no market for real wrestling. So anyone who has seen the famous movie Night in the City, the original Night in the City, with Richard Widmark, will remember that the sort of the villain in the film, he's turned wrestling into this entertainment, and he's very much despised by his father, because his father had actually been a real wrestler. He had wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, but the son figures, there's no way, you can't make any money on Greco-Roman wrestling. There just isn't an audience for that. It's too boring to watch. But when you have this entertainment, people screaming and throwing one another around the ring, you have an audience. So, that film was made in the 1940s. But Linda McMahon kind of made a fortune with this worldwide entertainment. What does she have? Well, she has Trump's ear. Trump likes sport and entertainment. He always did. That's from an early age, Trump has had this soft spot for not real sport, but sport as entertainment. He was closely associated with Mike Tyson back in the day. So he's always had the soft spot for that. I kind of agree with you, though. I mean, Secretary of Education. It's not. I mean, when she was in the previous administration, she was head of the Small Business Administration. But at least that was reasonably suitable. I mean, she had been a businesswoman, and so she had some experience in that. But Secretary of Education is a bit of a stretch for her. But on the other hand, I don't want to get too, when you say have Alex Jones for press secretary, I say, well, why not? I mean, he'd be kind of entertaining. Look, a lot of those those news conferences are completely ridiculous. They ask questions from the press secretary. The press secretary, she's just been given a briefing. She's been given a briefing by somebody in the White House. This is, you have to say this. And that's it. That's her brief. She has to say this. And then the reporters, they start arguing with the press secretary. And it's a complete waste of time. Well, what is the point of arguing with her? She's just been told to repeat this. The president isn't there. He's not there you can argue with. The White House chief of staff isn't there to argue with. So what's the point of picking on the wretched press secretary? So at least if you had Alex Jones, you might have some entertaining arguments. So I wouldn't be against that. Joe Rogan for Attorney General. Well, look, I mean, I tend to, I want to get some of the pomposity out of all these appointments. So I wouldn't be so down on Joe Rogan for Attorney General. I don't think he'd be any worse than Bill Barr. Bill Barr, who came in with all those credentials. He'd worked at the top law firms. He had been an Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, and he was a total disaster, the worst ever. As was Jeff Sessions. So I doubt whether Joe Rogan would be any worse. So, and as I say, I like your idea. I mean, I think that Alex Jones as press secretary, you should probably tweet that out. See, maybe someone in Trump world will say, hey, why don't we tap Alex Jones as president? At least, if you're a part of the White House staff, you don't have to go through the Senate confirmation process. So why not hire Alex Jones as press secretary? I mean, Trump hired that absolute idiot Scaramucci as press secretary. Again, I don't think Alex Jones would be any worse than Scaramucci. He probably wouldn't last very long. I mean, I think that but he would probably last a little bit longer than Scaramucci's. Anyway, Donaki goes, as for Gates, if Michael Tracy is right, he conveniently gets to keep his newly re-elected seat from January the 3rd. He only resigned from the current mandate so that all Senate appointments. Well, I don't know whether Michael Tracy is right, because Steve Bannon was saying something different. Steve Bannon was saying that no, Gates has actually resigned altogether from the House, so he has no intention of taking the oath on January the 3rd. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I know Tracy has been saying this, but Bannon said something different. So we'll see that. I don't think he's going to go back to the House. I think he may well now be eyeing the governorship in Florida. But again, I'm not sure that's how easy that will be for him to get now with this whole embarrassment. And Danaki says, and what does this tell us about the Republican support in the Senate? This whole affair is pretty lame. Good thing none of the psycho Zionists withdrew. I do agree with. I mean, I think, as I was saying earlier, Republicans are absolutely pathetic. They never hold the line. They never fight. The Democrats absolutely held the line. Always hold the line. When they impeached Bill Clinton in 1998, they didn't lose a single vote, not one vote. And that was just kind of amazing that in a way what the Republicans did to Bill Clinton, it was sort of payback for what the Democrats did to Richard Nixon, a quarter of a century earlier. But there's a big difference. The Democrats didn't lose a single vote in the House and in the Senate. Every single Democrat voted for Bill Clinton. But the Republicans, they were in disarray. And, many of the Republicans in the House were going to vote to impeach Nixon. I mean, even on that House Judiciary Committee, a number of the Republicans voted with the Democrats to recommend impeachment, including the disgusting William Cohen, who then went on to become Bill Clinton's defense secretary during the time of the bombing of Yugoslavia. So he showed himself what a scumbag he was back in the Watergate era. And so this is the way it always is. Just like Biden can nominate anyone. He can absolutely nominate some complete useless person, and the Democrats will hold the line. They will absolutely will go 100%. Republicans never do. And so, but we'll see whether now the others are going to be. They'll obviously be targeted. Gates is now ancient history. Now next target is Hegseth. Gates is gone. Now the target's Hegseth. But you're right. I mean, when it comes to Marco Rubio, he's going to waltz through. The vote for Rubio, I'd say 100-0. I don't think a single person is going to vote against Rubio. 100-0 for Rubio. Elise Stefanik, 100-0. So yeah, this is what you do. If Trump were to hire some Bill Barr like character for DOJ, again 100-0. But in the case of Hegseth, I mean, the Zionism obviously works in his favor. But what they want to do, what the Democrats want to do, and they're very skilled at it, they want to weaken Trump. They want to damage Trump. So the issue with um, Hexeth, yes, there's one ideological objection that they have to Hexeth. Leave aside all the nonsense that he's not qualified. That's all rubbish. I mean, how was Pete Buttigieg? How was he qualified to be transportation secretary? I mean, what the hell did he know about transportation? I mean, no one raised the issue. Right? Well, you don't know anything about transportation, so how are you what was it, Jennifer Granholm, who was energy secretary? Well, she didn't have any background in energy. But no, so that whole rubbish about he doesn't have any background in this. So that's nonsense. But the real issue here, it's not an ideology, even though they don't like his views on women. But the real issue is they want to damage Trump. And of course, when his nominees fall by the wayside, then of course Trump is weakened. Trump is damaged. Trump has now been weakened. The fall of Gates, really within a few days, has unquestionably weakened him. He nominated this person. It was a controversial pick. He came under attack, as was to be predicted. Trump didn't hold the line. Trump didn't defend him. So Trump now looks weak. That, and I think, as I say, as we were saying earlier, on Ukraine also, I think Trump is now looking weak. Biden is calling the shots, even though Biden lost the election. But Biden is calling the shots on Ukraine, and will be for another 2 months. But that's what the Democrats do. I mean, they pick off nominees just in order to weaken the Republican. You remember? Well, I don't know. You remember, but I remember with George H.W. Bush. Now, George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, there was never anything ideological about him. He was a kind of a waspy establishment Republican type. Yeah, I mean, true, he was Reagan's VP, but he was only Reagan's VP because Reagan needed a WASP establishment type to reassure the Republican Party that he was no crazy Barry Goldwater type. So that's why he got Bush as his VP. So, but when Bush became president, this is someone the Democrats and the Republicans would be perfectly happy to work with. I mean, what's that? There's nothing about Bush that's objectionable. Even so, they launched a ferocious attack on Bush's nominee for defense secretary. It's always defense secretary, John Tower. Now, John Tower had been, again, a kind of a pillar of the Senate establishment. He had been there for years. He had been a senator from Texas. He had presided over the Tower Commission, which looked into Iran-Contra. So he was absolutely in the club on Capitol Hill. Nonetheless, the Democrats launched an attack on John Tower and said that John Tower cannot possibly be defense secretary because he likes to imbibe. Horror upon horror. Imagine he likes to imbibe. No one else on Capitol Hill likes to imbibe. So they had to imbibe, and then they kind of launched into a whole thing about, he's a serial fornicator. He got to be seen in the company of women who were not his wife, and so that was used against him. And so he came on one of those Sunday talk shows and said, well, while I'll be defense secretary, I absolutely pinky promise to forswear alcohol. I will not let one drop of alcohol pass my lips. If only you will vote for me as defense secretary. And of course, that didn't do him any good, and he was gone. He didn't get the defense secretary job. So this was not ideological. What the Democrats did, very cleverly, is that they weakened Bush. Bush wanted Tower. Bush didn't get Tower. The Democrats showed, that they can destroy somebody who was one of their own. And, he was their colleague. He had been their colleague for years and years. They'd never had any problems. I mean, John Tower he had served with Sam Nunn. They were they were on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then Sam Nunn turned on him. So it's not even a matter of ideology. It's just a matter of politics. You weaken your opponents, and that's exactly what they did with Bush throughout his 4 years. Weakened him fatally, so that he was then ripe for the plucking by Bill Clinton in '92. I mean, they weakened him on all the budget negotiations, forcing him, Bush, into agreeing to tax increases. I mean, that's it. That's exactly what they wanted to do, because the one thing everyone remembered about George H.W. Bush is that when he ran in 1988, he had said, that, well, the Democrats are going to come to me and will ask me to raise taxes, and I will say no. And then they'll come again and ask me to raise taxes, and I will say no. And they'll come again and ask me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. And I'll say, no new taxes. Read my lips. That was his famous, read my lips. No new taxes. And of course, they got him to raise taxes, exactly what they always intended to do. And Bush knew that they would intend to do. And that, of course, sealed Bush's fate. But that just shows, that the Democrats are just so much better at playing this game than the Republicans are. And so, but again, as I say, what's important about this is that there was no ideological opposition to Bush. There was nothing. Bush was a completely unideological person, a totally kind of establishment type. Whatever you tell him, to do, you'll do. Anyway, Robert, thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for your generosity. Says, I suppose the obvious question to ask with regard to this latest round of escalation is, do you expect we will come out of it with or without getting a hair mussed? With 5 or 10 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks. Well, the thing that is significant that Biden will be there for another 2 months. So you've got 2 months in which he can actually lead to complete disaster. I mean, again, if the Republicans had any credibility, any seriousness, they would move today to impeach Biden. They say Biden has clearly lost his head. It's not up to them to invoke the 25th Amendment. That has to be done by the cabinet. That has to be done by the vice president. So the Republicans don't have any say in that. But they can impeach Biden and say that he's obviously leading the country towards a catastrophic world war, the exchange of nuclear weapons, and clearly the man who is too mentally incompetent to run for office can't possibly be mentally competent to preside over a world war. He needs to be removed immediately. That's what, absolutely, you get some Republicans should bring that to the floor and impeach him. But they don't do that. I mean, I don't even know what they do. I mean, it's like, you really feel with these Republicans, like, what would you say you do here? I mean, here's an absolute opportunity, because of how dangerous the situation is, how reckless Biden's decisions are, that he should just be impeached. And even if it fails, of course it'll fail. Of course they'll never get 67 senators to vote to remove him. At least it sets the ball in motion. So at least we're talking about some serious things. We're talking about removing a man who's clearly a complete catastrophe for his people. He needs to go. He needs to be removed now. And then and those who will refuse to vote to remove him, well, they'll have that on their record. You had an opportunity to do what's right for America and for the world. Remove a man who has no business presiding over the country. Remove him, so the world can actually be safe. I mean, You now have Putin, who was just made this statement. He went before his own people and he made this statement. He's never said this before, and said that we will, you do this again, we will start hitting targets, military targets in NATO land. One of those targets could be the United States. I don't think he's going to hit the United States, but one of them could be the United States. And this is what Biden has presided over. So when you say, will we get our hair mussed? I don't know. It's quite a serious situation, and the Republicans are not really doing anything about it other than sabotaging Matt Gaetz. That's their great contribution. But anyway, Robert, thank you for your generosity. Dale Owens, good to see you. Evening all. Richard Phillips, very good to see you. Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. So we see, Cynthia, we've got our the new poll, with film poll for next week's screening, which is political biography, and you've got the usual 8. But I liked your idea about films and psychoanalysis. I think that's gonna be the next poll about how psychoanalysis has been treated in the movies. I think it's a really interesting idea. But then this the political. But interestingly enough, it's not really that easy to find political biographies, movies that are actually based on real live political figures. I mean, there are lots of political movies, but usually they're just made up. They made up scandals and whatever. But something that's a political biography, there haven't been really that many movies like that. So anyway, Cynthia says, why are there so many conflicting reports as to whether or not Ukraine's most recent storm shadow strikes on Russia caused any damage or death there? Why is it so difficult to determine which reports are true and which ones aren't? Now, if you say a jet crash landed on the city, there'd be very little doubt as to how much damage and how many deaths resulted from that. So why is that hardly ever the case when missile strikes occur between warring nations, be it Ukraine or Russia or even Israel and Iran? Well, I guess it's a lot of it has to do with with propaganda. I mean, it's each side is going to want to exaggerate the accomplishments of their own strikes and minimize the accomplishments of their opponent's strike. So I don't know the truth of the claims. I mean, so the only thing that I think is worth considering is what Putin said apropos of the Storm Shadow attack. He claims that some people were killed. I don't know whether that's true, but he nonetheless claims that some people were killed as a result of the Storm Shadow attack. No one was killed as a result of the ATACMS attack. Again, I don't necessarily believe him, but I think that's what he claims, and I think that's all that matters at this stage, because that's a serious charge that he's making, because he's saying, essentially you're attacking on Russian territory, you're killing Russians, and basically it's the British who are doing it. So remember, he already came out this week with this new nuclear doctrine, in which is quite extensive. The various situations in which Russia would use nuclear weapons. And I mean, admittedly, when you use nuclear weapons, there's a whole gamut of different kinds of nuclear weapons. You have the short range, the medium range, the long range. You have the tactical nukes, the battlefield nukes, and then the strategic nukes. So he's not differentiating among them. He said, well, the conditions under which we would be ready to use nukes. And of course, yeah, he of course talked about when, if we would use them if we come under attack, nuclear attack, and then of course if we're come under a conventional attack, and such that the existence of the state is at stake. And then, of course, he's made this the adaptation, which is that if we're come under a conventional attack by a non-nuclear power that is being armed, trained, and encouraged by a nuclear power, then essentially, we regard it as an attack by a nuclear power, and therefore we can use nuclear weapons. But he went beyond that. He said that we are prepared to use nuclear weapons if the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Russia comes under attack. Again, he's not going to use strategic weapons necessarily if that happens. But what he's spelling out here is a very extensive scenarios about the use of nuclear weapons. But you're absolutely right. I mean, do we know the truth of what happened with these attacks? No. What we know is what Putin has said. And so Putin spelling out and essentially giving a warning to the West as to what he intends to do. So I think that's really, I think, the most important. He says the Storm Shadow attack, which is a British attack. It was he regards that as essentially a British attack, has led to the deaths of Russians. And says next time we will attack NATO powers that facilitate these attacks, that provide the weapons for these attacks. So you put two and two together and you say, well, next time we will target the British Isles. So I think that's irrespective of the truth of what actually happened with these attackums and the Storm Shadow. So it's more like now Keir Starmer, awful, this terrible, horrific prime minister, let him kind of contemplate that as to where he has led his country. But anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Thanks for your question. And then Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, always for your generosity. Carlos says, if Russia takes a deal that doesn't accomplish the stated goals of the SMO, would that discredit their justification for starting it? I think so. Particularly given the level of the casualties that they've taken. And I think that's, that's why I'm always so frustrated by the sort of the Xenon crowd, who are continually saying how Russia has won, Russia's winning, Russia's won, Ukraine's defeated, it's over, everything's always over. And they never really provide a kind of a measure of how do we determine that Russia has won? What goals has Russia accomplished? And particularly given the huge sacrifices that they have endured, to what extent have they accomplished any of the goals that they set out on February the 24th, 2022? Putin did spelled out exactly what his goals were. That's the measure. Just simply saying Russia won, Russia has won, because they've taken more territory in the Donbass. It's extraordinary how little people actually even discuss, what the casualties are, what Russian casualties are. Again, we can't. It's very hard to get numbers. It's just going back to Cynthia's point. It's very, very hard to get anywhere with these numbers. but if you suffer casualties of that magnitude, you better have achieved something. And so I think that that definitely is going to be a real issue about the deal. Now, I still predicted that if there is a deal, and I'm not sure if there is, as I say, I'm very skeptical of the idea that Trump is going to deliver. That Trump is that interested in bringing this to an end. I mean, I don't quite see what the upside is for Trump. I mean, obviously, I brought it to an end. Give me my Nobel Peace Prize, please. He's not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize, so that's all nonsense. But there's no real upside to him, because any deal struck, which would be, well, let's keep we'll have a ceasefire along the lines of contact, he will immediately be accused by everyone under the sun that, hey, you sold out Ukraine, you betrayed Ukraine, you weakened NATO. And you say, oh, well, Trump will withstand it. Well, we've seen Trump doesn't withstand these things. Trump is actually quite concerned about how he's perceived. You saw, he caved on Gates right away. So the whole idea that he's going to stand there, I don't care what you all say, peace is so important to me. You can call me an appeaser, you can call me a coward, you can call me a Putin lover, but I don't care about that. That's not Trump. And Trump will say, hey, there's no upside for me to bring this to an end. It's not like he's seeking re-election. So now, if he was seeking re-election, that might be very different, because then, he'd have MAGA, and MAGA might be very pissed with him that he didn't bring the Ukraine war to an end. But he's not seeking re-election. It's basically, he's going to have a good time for 4 years. So there's no particular pressure on him to bring this to an end, unless America was suffering greatly from this war. Well, America isn't suffering. I mean, in what way is America suffering from this war? It's not. So So that whole kind of expectation that he's going to rush in there on noon, January the 20th, and bring this to an end, I don't see it. So I don't think there's going to be any kind of a deal. And again, as we say, one would have to say, thank God for that. Thank God that there's no deal, because you're always afraid that if there was a deal, Russia would sign on to a very bad deal. And much like the Istanbul, which was that close. I mean, we were that close to a deal, which would have been an absolute disaster for Russia. So it was, thank God, thank you, Boris Johnson, that you sabotaged that terrible agreement in Istanbul. So, we can thank, Donald Trump. I think, we don't know, but that Donald Trump won't push anyone towards a deal. We say, because otherwise it'll be a really bad deal for Russia. Anyway, thank you, Carlos. So, real Peter Nolan, good to see you again. I think we should have women-only battalions with no men present to save them until women are 51% of combat deaths. Yeah. No, but yeah, I mean, that's I think it's it is the real kind of problem, which is that you can't put there's some men and women in combat when we know that all of the instinctive feelings of man is to save women, to rescue women. That's something that no going to get around, and that completely detracts from military effectiveness. Men don't care about one another; they just carry on with. But women is different. It's a terrible idea, and but in this kind of loony world in which we live, people embrace this and for the idea of equality. 51% of combat. All right. Anyway, thank you. Aristotle, good to see you. Thank you very much, Aristotle. Nice to hear someone stating the obvious. Oh, thank you. Nixon really was just sabotaged by the press then and since. Previously, you commented that Minsk was a brilliant deal for Ukraine. True, most people hedge around these issues and accept most of the propaganda. Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, thank you. I'm glad you point this out. First, yes, Nixon was absolutely undone by the media, which absolutely hated him. They hated Nixon ever since he kind of appeared on the political scene in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And then, during that race against Kennedy, when the media was swooning and in love with this fake, phony wasp Kennedy. I mean, kind of, this Irish son of a bootlegger was a kind of, he was this wasp with his hands in his pocket and everything. But they were absolutely on board with Kennedy, an election that obviously Nixon won. So despite all the negative campaigning against Nixon, he won. He won in 1960. I mean, it was stolen from him. Again, the Democrats, the masters of stealing elections, then as now. And but to their astonishment, when they were so gleeful that Nixon was finished, particularly after the 1962 gubernatorial race, when Nixon lost to when he ran for governor of California, he lost to Pat Brown, and that was I think ABC News ran a special program after that calling it the political obituary of Richard M. Nixon. But Nixon recovered, and then he came back astonishingly. Before Trump's comeback, that was the greatest comeback was Nixon in '68, and then to the horror, the absolute anguish and fury of the media, Nixon won the biggest landslide ever in 1972. Which nobody had expected, least of all Nixon. Nixon wasn't expecting this victory. He actually personally thought that he would have a very tough re-election battle because he thought that he would be up against Muskie or Kennedy or Humphrey. And he thought, this is going to be a tough race. He didn't think that he'd be up against McGovern and that he would win as easily as that. But anyway, the media then went after him and destroyed, the mandate that he got. He'd get a huge mandate in '72, and completely, ridiculously, absurdly whipped up this fervor about nothing. Which was Watergate, and to this day, people, they talk about Watergate. None of them really even know what was Watergate. I mean, what exactly happened in Watergate? But they whipped this up, and of course, the Democrats, who did control both houses of Congress in those days, they seized their opportunity, and the Republicans didn't hold the line. They didn't hold the line, and including the despicable Barry Goldwater, who was the one who finally pulled the plug on Nixon in the summer of 1974, when he went to see him and said, "Hey, you don't have any votes in the Senate." It was particularly obnoxious for Goldwater to do that because in 1964, when the Republican Party establishment completely cut off Goldwater and were rooting for LBJ to defeat Goldwater, really, that was Nelson Rockefeller, George Romney was Mitt's father. Basically, they were, supporting LBJ against the nominee of their own party. So everybody abandoned Goldwater, with the one exception of Richard Nixon. And Nixon campaigned for Goldwater. Nixon gave a nominating speech on behalf of Goldwater in the '64 convention. And of course, Goldwater, this kind of ridiculous curmudgeon that he was, was the one, of course, he turned on Nixon. You always, of course, turn on your friends. There's no point in turning on your enemies, all the people who kind of did you in. No, you turn on your friends. So, yeah, that was then. And then, the Minsk was a great deal for Ukraine, terrible deal for Russia. And as I said a moment ago, Istanbul was another terrible deal for Russia, which Russia was ready to sign on to. But out of the generosity of the gods gave us Boris Johnson, who went in and told Zelensky not to sign this deal. God, imagine how terrible it would be if Zelensky had signed the deal. Russia would have lost everything. So that's why, what I think is going to save us now, that's if we don't get our hair mussed, as Robert put it, but is that Trump isn't really going to push for this deal. Because if Trump really put his political capital and his reputation and everything for pushing for this deal, you have to worry that Russia might accept. They might be persuaded by Trump. So, maybe what we can hope for is that Trump just won't be interested enough to press for this deal. But let's hope so anyway. Let's hope that he doesn't press for it. Anyway, Aristotle, thank you so much for your generosity. Marty, as always, thank you so much. Really appreciate your generosity and all your many postings. So it's really good, particularly on the recent screening of 2001. And Judy, thank you so much, Judy, for your generosity. Judy says, Putin said today concerning the new missile demonstrated in Dnipro, that's not how he pronounces it. He does the Russian pronunciation, which is Dnipro. Oh, God. No, all right, I'm not going to do it. All right. We will offer in advance to civilians and also our citizens of friendly states to leave the dangerous zones. We will do this, Dnipropetrovsk. We will do this for humanitarian reasons, openly, publicly, without fear of counteraction from the enemy, who will also receive this information. Why no fear? Because the new missile defense system created by the Americans in Europe do not intercept such missiles. Yeah, he said that it wasn't part of the slides that I read out. Yeah, no, that was a, yeah, I mean, it was obviously a very, it was a humanitarian gesture. He said, hey, you don't have the technological capability to stop these missiles. So therefore, because you don't have the technological capability, we will give you advance warning so that you can remove all civilians and pretty much all human personnel from getting killed. Yeah, that was got it generous, very generous. I mean, I think, Judy, I mean, I think you'll agree with me. I think that there was Putin's strongest statement ever as a warning to the West. I mean, now I know there are people who are skeptics, and I understand that, who think that this is just yet more big talk from Putin. I think this is more than just big talk. I mean, this is very explicit. This isn't just Medvedev talking about, hey, we're going to destroy Piccadilly Circus, or we're going to blow up the Brandenburg Gate, which is just empty talk. This was very specific. And he said, we're going to hit military targets in countries that have been providing these missiles to Ukraine to hit Russian territory. And so that's very specific. There's, we're not going to blow up the Brandenburg Gate, and we will hit military targets. And I think that I think is quite serious. We'll see if people respond. I mean, so far the coverage in the media has been typically shallow, in that they're again, Putin's just, once again, saber rattling, threatening, and we don't need to take these threats seriously. I wouldn't take my chances. It's just, and I think we've pointed this out before. Russians are very, very patient. They kind of take one humiliation after another, but there is a point at which their patience snaps, and this was what happened with Boris Yeltsin in '99. Because remember, NATO began bombing Yugoslavia, and this actually caused some distress among Russians, because they thought, hey, the Serbs are supposed to be our friends. We actually went to war in 1914 on behalf of the Serbs. So back in 1914, we were ready to sacrifice ourselves on behalf of the Serbs, and here is NATO, which just simply pushes us aside and just starts pummeling our little brother. And it was really causing absolute fury in Russia. It's like, because again, it's like, you suddenly you see your little brother getting beaten up by local thugs, and you're unable to do anything to help your little brother. Then it's deeply humiliating. And that brought the Yeltsin era to an end. He was gone. He was gone within a few months, and that's when they installed Putin. And I think something like that will almost certainly take place if Putin does not respond. And Putin has to respond. I mean, of course, it's very dangerous if you bomb a NATO country, but he can't not do it, because it's very dangerous not to respond. Because if you don't respond, then essentially you've ceased to be a great power, and therefore you are now among the countries that get bombed, dismantled, destroyed, and you're not able to do anything about it. So Russia has to respond, and I think Putin's statement today was very explicit. It was a very explicit warning of what Russia will do, and Russia is now ready to do, because the alternative is just simply unacceptable. But anyway, thank you, Judy, and you're right. He did say that we'll be very generous, because as you quote, unfortunately, you don't have the technological know-how to stop these missiles. So we have to help you out. So yeah, that was kind of, yeah. So we'll do it, so you don't lose any civilians, and unfortunate as a result. Anyway, thank you, Judy. And where are we? Oh, yeah. So then Danaki says, everybody and their deaf uncle knew ever since at least the sinking of the Moskva that NATO is providing targeting data and whatnot. So here we are, 2+ years of being led by the nose later. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's I mean, as I say, I mean, the Russians just are very patient when they shouldn't be, and I think that they should have acted much more vigorously and proactively at a much earlier stage. And you of course, you're right. The sinking of the Moskva could not have been done by the Ukrainians. I mean, none of these attacks, all these attacks on and the drone attacks. I mean, the drones are the same as the missiles. I mean, Ukraine cannot target oil refineries or airfields with these drones without the targeting information provided by NATO. So absolutely, that this has been done. NATO has been providing this targeting data, and and essentially data on flight paths and everything from the beginning. There's no way Ukraine can hit oil refineries hundreds of kilometers away with that kind of precision without the information provided by NATO. So they've been doing this from the beginning. But Russia, and we've all been very disappointed by Russia's weakness. It was unnecessary. It was its weakness that has led to an unfortunate number of deaths. I think if Russia had responded much more vigorously earlier on, I think lives could have been saved. So that's I agree with you. Judy says, combine Putin's statement with what Maria Zakharova was today at her press conference, that the United States anti-missile base at Radzikwo, Poland, is priority target for potential neutralization. She did say that. That's true. I still tend to think that they might hit the British first, but maybe not. I mean, there's just something about the British that is particularly obnoxious. I mean, they've been the most belligerent in during the time of this war, and even before that, going all the way back to the Skripals and orchestrating all the expulsion of Russian diplomats, and they were the ones who provided the Storm Shadow. I mean, Poland hasn't provided the missiles, and Putin specifically said that that's what he finds particularly irksome. The countries that have provided the weapons to be used against us. So I think that's why maybe Britain may be target number one, but it's possible that Redzikovo will be target number one. Because as you say, Zakharova did bring that up today. But there's no question. I mean, if this continues, if there's another attack, I think it's quite likely that Russia will respond. But then we go back to the issue that we've been discussing, which is Biden has another 2 months to continue. And this could be a complete catastrophe. 2 months. A man who's clearly mentally incompetent. So who the hell knows what the world will be like on by January the 20th. So the whole issue of peace agreements and deals and whatnot with Trump, that might all just be moot by January the 20th. I mean, there might be just an all-out shooting war between Russia and NATO. So that's why, as I say before, if the Republicans had the slightest wherewithal, the slightest desire to take power and to govern, they would absolutely move to remove Biden from power. And Denaki says, I agree that Rogan would not be worse than scumbag Barr, and Jones would for sure be pure entertainment, not to mention the total libtard meltdown. Yeah, it's just, you mentioned two people. I thought, yeah, okay, I can see them in the administration. Why not? I mean, Rogan, I think, would have some difficulties getting confirmed, because you nominated him for Attorney General. That since it's a governmental agency, you need Senate confirmation. But you can absolutely hire Alex Jones as your press secretary. You don't need the Senate to confirm him there. And I have to say, I can't help laughing. I mean, the idea of having Alex Jones. And now that you suggested, I mean, what would be wrong with that? Why would that be unacceptable to have Rogan as your White House press secretary? I think it would be absolutely great. I mean, can you imagine all the fights that you would have between Alex Jones and the CNN reporters and so on? I mean, it would be hugely entertainment. And I think, again, Jones, I think, would be much more effective than Scaramucci. Scaramucci just, he got this opportunity, like many do, and then he kind of blew it. I think within about 48 hours. I don't think Jones would do that. But I don't see why Rogan couldn't have some kind of a job in the administration. Again, I don't know that he'd want to. I mean, he has such a great gig, but I don't see any real problem but hiring Alex Jones or Joe Rogan. I mean, as I say, I mean, it's one of the more endearing features of Trump is that he does hate pomposity and wants to kind of take people down and just remove all the grandeur about the big agencies, big government, big shindigs, and it's like I think was it the G7 meeting or the G20 meeting? That was the time when he brought along his ghastly daughter Ivanka, and Ivanka started. I mean, I'm sure everyone has seen those that video. It's on YouTube, and Ivanka started moving around among all these important foreign dignitaries. With what's the name? Theresa May, and what was the name of the woman who was the European Central Bank? God, I forgot the name, but and then Macron and Justin Trudeau, and of course she was completely ridiculous, saying all kinds of silly things, and he did look ridiculous. I mean, who the hell is Ivanka? Butting into conversations between Theresa May and Emmanuel Macron. But I think Trump just found that appealing. We don't want all these pompous leaders of government, having these important conversations. Bring on Ivanka and cut them down to size. They, of course, all hated it, but that only pleased Trump all the more. So that's a part of Trump that I think is endearing. Even when he hired Scaramucci, was kind of funny. Or that silly woman. The one. So he hires all these terrible people. They do bring problems for him. But yeah, no, I kind of like that. But those names, Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, I think will be tremendous appointments. I don't. I don't see any problems at all there. Marty has just posted, Alex Jones screaming, doing InfoWars. Yeah, that would be great on Alex Jones. And again, what would happen? Again, the media would scream and complain about Alex Jones, but they would scream and complain anyway. I mean, whoever Trump appoints. So why not have them gnash their teeth about Alex Jones? I just think the idea is hilarious. These press briefings will never quite be the same with after Alex Jones. Anyway, so Sinok says, thank you so much, Sinok. I really appreciate your generosity. And he says, a disgrace that Biden and Congress will forgive Ukrainian debt while there is a freeze on hiring doctors at the Veterans Administration. Yeah, that's Biden has now proposed that forgiving Ukrainian debt, and it's a complete outrage. As of course is the seizure of Russian assets, theft. Something it's never been done. As I say, even said this, we've talked about this before. It was not even done in the case of Nazi Germany. I mean, the Nazi German assets were frozen, but they were never used by the Allies. Hey, we can just help ourselves to this money and buy weapons and ammo with German money. It was never done, but what they've done is something that it's never been done. So it's a disgrace. And you're right. I mean, forgiving Ukrainian debt. While Americans, there's nothing for Americans. And particularly when we just had an election, and in this election, that was a key issue, which is public money, taxpayer money is being wasted on stupid foreign wars that have nothing to do with American interests, but there's no money for address problems at home. I mean, this wasn't the issue of the election. The voters made their feelings plain, and Biden just simply gets to ignore this. That's why it's look, I mean, the whole way this is set up, that you can have 2.5 months in which an outgoing administration that has been defeated and humiliated in an election can simply use those 2.5 months to sabotage and undermine the incoming administration, the people who had actually won the election. It's outrageous. Now, it's because of tradition has said, well, we have suggested, okay, well, we're not going to do anything to undermine the incoming administration. But after what Obama did, it's clear that there's absolutely no reason to respect this tradition. Obama used those 2.5 months to undermine the incoming Trump administration, the people who had won the election. Well, once Obama was ready to do that, and now Biden has been ready to do that, then it's up to the Republicans to step up. They can't do anything about the change of power takes place on January 20th. What they can do is just move to impeach, move to remove Biden from power. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So Psinok, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Robert, do you expect anything substantive to come of the ICC Netanyahu indictment? No, I don't. It's quite remarkable that it's happened, because remember we had Karim Khan saying, well, I'm going to seek an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, and that was months and months and months went by, and basically we had all concluded that, well, nothing's going to happen. I mean, this is you just made a bit of a splash saying you're going to seek an arrest warrant, but the judges will never actually sign off on an arrest warrant. But they've done it now. Now, nothing at all substantive, of course, will come of it. The whole business that he's going to have difficulties traveling, I don't believe it for one moment. I think the whole the Rome Statute does not say that the signatories are obligated to arrest anyone who who has been indicted by the ICC. That's not true. It doesn't say that. There are all sorts of caveats and carve-outs whereby you can avoid arresting a suspect, an indicted suspect. So that simply isn't true. So that's why I think if Netanyahu were sought to travel to a country that is a party to the Rome Statute, I don't think he would be arrested. But I don't know whether he would, I mean, I don't think Netanyahu does that much traveling. I can't remember where else he has gone other than the United States. Well, he's not going to be arrested in the United States because the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute. I mean, I guess he could go to Russia. Russia is also not a party to the Rome Statute. So I don't know that he has to worry too much. And probably the Americans are really going to hit the ICC. Now, obviously, they're going to impose sanctions against anyone who works for the ICC. I think they're probably they're going to hit, impose some other punishment on the ICC. Maybe if they can seize their assets. I think Trump will probably try to see if any assets they have. I mean, whether in the United States or maybe, even, Americans are pretty good at using secondary sanctions. So any business that they do using dollars, maybe the Americans can stop that. So I think they're going to impose all kinds of punishments. I mean, I posted kind of half jokingly earlier today that I think probably the Trump administration will launch a drone attack on the ICC building in The Hague. I'm not sure they're going to go exactly there, but I think they will probably impose severe sanctions, and particularly on any financial transactions that the ICC engages in. So it might just blow up in the ICC's face in doing this, but good for them. I mean, that they actually did this. But again, I mean, the notion that Netanyahu would be arrested by the British authorities, that is just absurd. I mean, I don't think he's going to visit Britain, but or if he will go to Amsterdam, to sniff out anti-Semitism in Amsterdam, I don't think he's going to go there. But even if he were to visit Amsterdam, I don't think the Dutch would arrest him. So nice that it's done, but I think it'll have no practical effects, and I think it'll lead to punishment of the ICC at the hands of the Americans. So, Marty, nice, remembering of the inauguration of January the 20th, 2017. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody who has joined me. Thank you, everybody, particularly who donated generously. Friday is always a bad day. That's when the dogs, they go and then they would look at the tip jar and say, "What the hell's been going on this week?" And they say, "Well, they turn to me and say, well, what have you been doing this week?" I don't know. I've been doing live streaming. And they say, "No, you haven't been doing live streaming. Whatever else you've been doing, you haven't been doing live streaming." So it's always very hard. But thank you for giving me some grounds to argue my case with those ferocious hounds. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. So this weekend we're going to do some podcasts, and then next Monday we'll have the live stream with Peter, and then Tuesday it's once again live stream solo. Now, between now and then, we might indeed, as Robert put it, we could have a hair must, 5 to 10 million tops, depending on the breaks. So anyway, thank you for this evening, and see you very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.